Ni wakati wa Africa. It's a loosely translated phrase from Swahili meaning it is time for Africa. Welcome to another conversation exploring Africa's path forward. I'm Felicity Eziwike. From the vibrant commercial scenes of Lagos and Accra to the thriving tech ecosystems of Nairobi and Cape Town, African cities are hubs of innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurial spirit. Africa's youth are redefining the continent's narrative, driving innovation, creating jobs, and pushing boundaries. According to the African Development Bank, by 2030, Africa will have the largest youth population in the world, with women making up nearly half of the continent's entrepreneurs. But despite this much talked about potential, Africa's women and youth are still disproportionately affected by poverty, inequality, and they continue to face significant barriers to success. We are moving forward, yes, in tiny steps. But how can we unlock the full potential of Africa's youth and create an even bigger future for our continent? To speak to these questions are co-founder and CEO, Kutana Technologies, Samuel Boakye-Opoku. Also here is development scholar practitioner, Professor Jelili Adebiyi. Gentlemen, thank you very much for the gift of your time on One Slot.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this conversation, Felicity.
All right, Prof, let's start with you. Can you share your, I think we should start rather with Samuel. Share your personal experience as an African entrepreneur and how your experiences have helped shape your perspectives on the challenges and opportunities facing young people and women on the continent.
Yeah, thank you so much, Felicity. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Great. So I originally from Ghana, and I started off actually as a normal employee, right, working in a management consulting company. But my journey as a founder or as an entrepreneur began when I really did see some challenges I faced in my own job, at which I decided to actually start my company. The one thing that has been clear throughout my journey, either working across sub-Saharan Africa, which is Ghana, Nigeria, a few other countries, has been that even though there exists a lot of support or some amount of support for startups and founders and young people trying to build innovative businesses and solutions for the market that they are in, there's still a lot more to do when it comes to funding is uniquely underserved. If you compare the funding that is being received year on year by founders compared to founders in Africa compared to founders outside of Africa, there's a stark difference. My particular experience was I was looking to really solve a problem that was affecting businesses at the time that I was serving. Just having access to be able to, as a young entrepreneur, to be able to reach these businesses and talk to them to understand even whether my solution was useful or not was a bit of a challenge. And so to give you context, Kutana Technologies came out of many different iterations of an idea. We started off as we wanted to make sure that we support SMEs across Africa, trading across Africa, and also outside Africa with their counterparts in Europe and a few other markets. And one thing we did see immediately was when interacting with businesses, there was a high level and apathy towards trading with other counterparts, even in the next country, like from Ghana to Togo. And the reason mainly was many businesses had been burnt before. And this is happening to a lot of different entrepreneurs because there are not clear infrastructure built. And I'm just hitting on different issues here that new entrepreneurs are always going to face, because there are not clear laid down infrastructures when it comes to payment, when it comes to internet access, and a few other different things. It's very difficult to have a really strong trust system that allows entrepreneurs to actually do. The thing about capital, which I'll probably just finalize my point on, is the capital you see that has been given to a lot of entrepreneurs on the continent mostly come from outside Africa, and this is not entirely bad. What I'm trying to drive at is we need to be able to, there's a lack of inside capital within the African continent, and especially risk capital that supports businesses when they are growing. Access to finance, especially when it comes to debt finance, is either very, very hard to get for a new entrepreneur that is actually getting onto the market, or even when they get it, the cost of capital can be as high as 50%. This is something that's unheard of in other markets. And so these are, I guess, many of the issues that I personally have faced, and I'm sure many businesses are also facing when or many young entrepreneurs are facing when they're trying to launch a new product, bring up a new innovation. No, thank you.
I wanted to start with Samuel to highlight some of these challenges, and then I come to you, Prof, being in the academia, and I was reading a bit about your work just before I came on, and I saw that you've done quite a bit of work with improving livelihood through increased agricultural productivity. So you have a vast knowledge of what it takes to actually bring out stuff that is truly African. Talk to us about that experience and how some of the challenges that Samuel has shared impacted the outcomes that you had.
Yeah, thank you so much, Felicity, for that intelligent question. And Samuel, thank you for getting the discussion started on a very high note. Before I actually venture into responding to your question, for the benefit of our viewer, it is important that I throw out some statistics about youth in Africa. By the year 2050, we are going to be having about 362 million youths between the age 15 and 24 in Africa. And somebody might be curious why the attention given to the age 15 and 24. Here we need to step back a little bit. United Nations defines youth based on that particular age bracket, 15 to 24. However, the definition of youth varies across different African countries. For example, in Nigeria, the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics defined the youth as individuals between the age of 15 and 35. And when you look at that particular statistics in Nigeria, what that means is that the youth constitute about 70% of the Nigerian population. When we talk about it in terms of the specifics of numbers, we are looking at about 160 million people. And we can still break it down in Nigeria, because within that age bracket, we have folks under the age of 15 that are 42% of the Nigerian population. That is, they are still under the base we call the youth. And there's another one between the age of 10 and 19 that constitutes 20%. So when we are talking about youth, we need to unbundle it because the challenges are not necessarily the same for the youth between the age bracket, under the less than 15 years of age, and for those between the age of 10 and 19, and for those, that can actively really work. So we need to understand that perspective. So all of those classification categories of youth will feed into my response to your question and the entire conversation today. The youth in Africa, they are faced with many challenges. Many people, when they respond to this issue, they look at it, from the perspective of, okay, they have graduated from the university, they don't have a job. That is looking at the symptoms. The real challenges that African youths are facing, especially in countries like Nigeria, has a lot to do with dysfunctional educational system. Because what we expect an educational system that is effective, an educational system that is productive to do for the youth is to set them up thinking very high of themselves in terms of what they can do to solve the problems facing communities across their country, what they could do to drive economic growth, what they could do to break away from the yoke of poverty that more or less is intergenerational when you look at the crystallization of youth in countries like Nigeria. Unfortunately, the public educational system that is available in many African countries, especially in Nigeria, is nothing to talk about. It's nothing to write home about. So we have big issue with the educational system being dysfunctional. The educational system is not equipping many African youth with the skills that they need to unleash their potential, to realize their potential, to drive development, to drive economic growth on the continent. So, and that's one of the biggest issues we need to address, because we are currently in what is known as a knowledge economy, an informational economy. And the foundation that needs to be addressed starts with the elementary educational system, goes through the high school educational system.
Sorry to interject, Prof. I know you're going somewhere, but I just had a thought as you're talking, defining youth and a dysfunctional education system. I personally graduated from the university at about 29. I did my national youth service when I turned, just as I was turning 30. One would expect that for somebody who is graduating from the university, you should be about 24. You still fall into the youth bracket. Does that make, considering the reality of the education system we have, that sometimes you don't get to graduate until you're in your early 30s, is there a possibility that we can, for our African context, redefine what age bracket should be confined to the youth?
I don't think we should make it a question of age bracket discussion because it could be misleading. And that is why there is no definitive consensus globally about what constitutes the word youth. Culture feeds into the construction of what is implied by youth, especially, for example, when you go to the Arabian community, in the Middle Eastern community, when they use the word youth, it may mean that somebody that is yet to be of age in terms of wisdom. And in many cultural settings in Africa, there is also that imputation that, when you're having a conversation and when they look at the quality of your contribution, if it is not top-notch, the Yorubas, I'm a Yoruba guy from Nigeria. They will say it's talking like a young boy, like a youth, meaning that it's yet to be a person of wisdom. So, and that is why I won't go along the line of age. What really matters for me is this. What development, my experience in the development arena and on the street, because many times when people introduce me, they said it's a professor. I'm a person of the street, I grew up on the street, I understand the language of the street. So
I think that takes us back to the question that I asked you. Samuel, don't worry, I'm coming. I have plenty of questions for you, but I just wanted the Prof to stay on the thought he's been pushing forward. I needed to bring in that context to the conversation as well, so we can maybe expand the potentials that we keep talking about. So from your experience with creating productivity, what are some of the key things that the young people are doing that you think needs to be amplified beyond us fixing, which is a more long-term, more complex issue, the educational system? What are they doing currently that we can amplify and that will be helpful in the conversation about how they can, contribute further to the growth?
Yeah, the creative economy is a big one for African youth. The African youths are really doing greatly. They are doing well in the creative economy. And there are opportunities for us to do better in the creative economy. Because when you look at the creative economy, there are many avenues through which we can solve the problem of intergenerational poverty that is affecting many youths and through which can drive growth and development in Africa. For example, we have a lot of traditional histories that can be converted into the creation of cartoon alone. And that can become a global product that we are going to be selling. Many people, they spend a lot of time, consuming cartoon. That's an economy. There's an economy behind it. We've not been able to tap into this economy in Africa. So that aspect of the digital economy is one of the areas, and Africa can actually do a lot. When you look at the folks who are involved in Yahoo in Africa, I still see them as folks that can be absorbed into the digital economy in Africa, into the creative economic space in Africa. For example, when you go to places like India, who are those that are actually the driving force behind leveraging things related to information technology, things related to digital economy, things related to creative economy? They are the youths. And when you look at this particular ecosystem, many youths in Africa, they are doing well. But a significant number of them can be absorbed into this ecosystem and use it to power economic growth. And that is where we actually need a cross-sectional intervention from different stakeholders, folks that are currently doing well in this ecosystem. They need to work they need to come up with an upscaling plan, how they can support their colleagues to get into this space and do well. For example, we're talking about artificial intelligence now, which is also within all this kind of ecosystem I've been talking about. Where is African youth in this?
Okay.
This is the question I want to know. Can we absorb many of these guys that are wasting in the areas of Yahoo into this sector?
All right, Prof, I could listen to you talk all day, but let's also bring in Samuel. I have scripted questions, but I'd rather, ask questions that's relevant to what you submitted. You talked about access to capital. I find it curious when you said most of the funding doesn't come from Africa. I want you to expand on that thought and maybe share some ideas on how we can better improve access to funding for entrepreneurs in Africa internally as against relying on external contributions.
So this is a really good question, Felicity. Thank you. So the thing that we need to understand when it comes to access to finance, right, is we need to understand how entrepreneurship is and works. This is basically somebody that says, I have found a solution somewhere, or I've thought about an idea and I want to build a solution and somebody should fund me. So ideally what's happening here is anybody that puts money into a founder or an innovator is basically putting money into an idea that basically has been just written on paper in somebody's mind and then trying to bring it to life. So investing in a person in a sense before the idea turns into a product. And this is what you call like risk capital. Right. The reason why a lot of it exists, and this is just my theory, a lot of it exists outside Africa, especially when you look at the very popular US Silicon Valley type of investment, is because these economies have been able to build themselves up to the point where there's excess amount of money to be able to risk. Right. And I think this sort of mindset needs to be made very clear. Now, when you come back to the African continent and maybe explain a lot more also about why this is happening, right? You've got not so old tech and innovation ecosystem, probably now 20 years tops. What that means is that there's a lot of work that needs to be done for some founders to move on to exiting their companies, selling, to make a lot more money, to be able to become investors themselves. However, the way we can also basically go at this is look at who are the ones in the market at the moment who have the extra cash, the dry powder sitting down that could be deployed. I mean, across Nigeria, Ghana, and a few other markets, there are all the, the chiefs and then the big guys who are running the nations and who have money. But the way money is being deployed is very different. It's being put in real estate and it's being put in things that old money people feel these are good investments. So I think for me, the first instance is how do we turn already existing money in Africa? Because it's not that there's no money in Africa. There is money in Africa, but the money is not being deployed into young people the way it's supposed to be. This doesn't mean that we should create another program that goes into training youth in another skill or a certain kind of capacity building program again, because that has been done so much by development corporations, and we've seen that what moves the needle is real venture capital, and this is something that we need to start cultivating within the African continent. So that's one way, like private people's money getting into the ecosystem. But then there's also the access to debt capital, which has been a topic forever since I even started working and becoming a professional myself. Access to capital across the continent is just so bad and so difficult that for younger people it's just impossible. If you're a young person, you really need to have a house, you need to have something that will basically make sure that you have a mortgage for the loan you're taking, right? We need to change that system a little bit and make access to funding a lot less cumbersome than it is at the moment. Right, and that brings us also back to there are certain things that needs to be done, I guess, from a long-term perspective. And we can talk about it, Felicity, for a long time, because these are things that are very infrastructural based. But I guess the base point is we need to start cultivating the habit of putting money into younger people as and when they are starting, and encouraging them to actually build the businesses that will stay the test of time. I can give you an example of, especially in Nigeria. Nigeria is a really good example of a market that is doing this very well. There's a few founders who have moved on from, especially when you look at the Flatter Wave story, and this very popular now. He's in VC. He's mostly known as E, and he runs this new fund called Accelerate, right? And you can see the trajectory of how founders can go from being a founder, moving out of a business and going into VC because they've seen the potential in supporting different entrepreneurs. So these are some examples that we could have as blueprints moving forward. But then there's a lot more that we can do when it comes to funding and access to finance. Before I end, I just wanted to touch on a little bit on what Prof mentioned, because I think this is really important when it comes to the whole educational bit. I think the one thing that is really lacking across the continent is just, for me, I always put it as a central point, and I call it access, right? We need to have different types of access points when we talk about education. It shouldn't just be the university. And Felicity, to your point, assuming there were different routes, well-respected routes where youth and young people can go through to pursue different things, like the way the vocational educational training have been looked down upon for a long time, especially in my case from Ghana, it has been looked down upon. I don't know how it is in Nigeria, but we need to have different routes for apprenticeships, for different things, not just going through the university, because not everybody needs to go to the university. And again, coming back to my point, I am not necessarily saying that every young person should be an entrepreneur. We need a mixture of both. We need the skills that will power their entrepreneurship as well. So I think having these things are really key.
All right, let's go back to Prof. You are in that space, so I want to know what you think about how we can even begin to address the dysfunctional education system that we have across Africa. Samuel has suggested different access. What's your thinking there?
Thank you, Samuel, for expanding on the issue of, access points. And beyond the issue of access points, it's also about the quality of the teachers in African educational system. I'm educated across 3 continents. I was educated in Africa, I was educated in Asia, and I was educated in the United States. And one of the things I noticed that they do differently in Asia and that they also do differently in North America is the quality of teachers' education and the educators themselves, because the quality can set up the kids and the youth for a great productive future, and at the same time, it can negatively impact them. When you look at the quality of the teachers, you find in most public educational systems, especially at the elementary level in Africa, is abyssal. Majority of them are people who, in the first instance, were not even willing to be educators.
The quality of teachers have always been on the table. That's something that's been talked about countlessly. But I wanted you to, how do we, aside which is key, agreed, but aside the quality of teacher, what kinds of education are we looking to encourage more creative and entrepreneurial spirits?
Yeah, because education is a system, and we need to get the totality of the element in the system right. Even if the content is right, if the right educators with the right quality are not in the system, it's still going to be dysfunctional. So we need to get everything right. So the quality of the teachers, of the educators really matters. It's part of it. Then the other thing is the content. And that's another thing I noticed in terms of the differential between the education in Asia and North America. What I noticed is that, back in the days when I was growing up, we really had good education. I say that a lot, that we really had good elementary education. And but that elementary education that was, by my assessment, really great when I was growing up in Nigeria was also defective. For example, the education was about, mastering the concept without actually solidifying our practical skills. I could remember that when I lived with my children now, potentially they know what they want to do when they grow up. Some of them will say that I want to become this, I want to become this, and I've started acquiring those skills since my elementary educational years. That is one of the missing links in our current educational system. So we need to do a stock accounting of the skills that are required in the modern economy and incorporate that into the content of education and how we impart that education in Africa, because content is another thing and we need to get the content right. We need to take a stock of the skills that are currently missing in educational systems in Africa at the elementary level, at the high school level, at the university level, and incorporate those skills as part of the content that we deliver across these different educational ecosystem.
All right.
Besides the issue of content, it's also about the mode of delivery. The mode of delivery is also important because that could affect the creative abilities of those that are recipients of such educational system. And that's another thing we also need to revisit. How do we impart this educational system? Is it killing the creative ability of the youth, or is it enhancing and enabling the creative abilities of our youth? That's another thing that we need to do. And then the other thing, how we do that also matters. There is a lot of emphasis that we should look at what the market is requiring. If we do that, we're also going to be creating a crisis for our future. Because education is not
Prof,
just about the market.
You need to hold that thought about looking at the market, because I want you to speak further. When we come back from this short break, I'm also going to take the conversation a little away to look at other innovative solutions that you might have experienced in your time. Thank you very much. We'll be right back after this break. Staying with us, the conversation remains about how we can expand the potential of African youths to drive economic growth and productivity across the continent and beyond. My guests are Professor Jelili Adebiyi. We also have Samuel Boakye-Opoku. Before we went on that break, the Prof was talking about fixing our dysfunctional education system. And one of the submissions that I interjected on was, fashioning one that speaks to the needs of the market. I wanted us to take a break, Prof, because that is a very wild conversation. What is your perspective? Share your perspective as extensively as you can on fashioning education that speaks to the need of the market. Is that the way to go? You don't seem to agree, though.
I mean, it's imperative for education to be responding to the needs of the market, because at the end of the day, when people graduate from an educational system, there is a time that they are either job creators, that is adding jobs to the job market, or they are job seekers. So if you're going to be seeking for job, what that means is that you need to be employment ready, and you need to be employment worthy. And for people to be employment worthy, we can use the concept of reverse engineering. What that means is that we can look at the demands of the market, the demands of the industry, and use that to retool the curriculum that forms the basis of education. And when I use the word education, I'm not just talking about education in formal spaces. I'm also talking about education in informal spaces. And that's something we need to pay a lot of attention to in Africa. The economic changes, transformation to the commanding height of our economy doesn't necessarily need to follow the Western model. Informality is part of the job market in Africa. Informality is part of what typifies the economy in Africa. So when we talk about education, we should also be thinking about education from the informal perspective, and how does actually prepares people to tap reasonably into the demands of the job market, both in the informal economy and in the formal economy. And that is why the concept of reverse engineering becomes imperative here, looking at what the market is looking for. And we have to do that very creatively, because the demand of the market are not static. They're always evolving. So we need to leverage that insight creatively and anticipatorily in a way that we set up our educational system such that it prepares people for the demands of the market, so that when they graduate, they will not be hearing words that they are not employment worthy, they are not competitive, they are not groomed to be ready for the job. That's one of the things that we need to pay a lot of attention when it comes to retooling our education in a way that responds to it. I will give you a very good example. Okay. I run an institute. When I graduated, when I finished my PhD, and I look at opportunities that by the grace of God I've had in life. When I look at the cost of my doctoral education, it was close to $200,000. And I never paid a dime for this education. I was fully funded. And we wanted to give back. And I spoke with some of my colleagues. I said, not all of those in Africa that are far better than us will have the opportunity to come to develop world, to have the kind of education that we had, top-notch education, no doubt about that. And then we said we wanted to give back. So we started what is known as the Leaders of Africa Institute. In this Leaders of Africa Institute, what we do is to look at the gaps. We look at the gaps in the education that is available to a typical African youth. And we set up a curriculum that is assisting them to bridge this gap. Right. And one of the signature programs we started is what we call the Research Method Program.
All right, Prof. It is fair to say that you are practicing what you are preaching, because it takes real commitment to want to give back to the people. I will come back to you. Either we explore further fixing the dysfunctional education system, or we switch a bit to the knowledge economy that you talked about. But Samuel, what are some of the innovative solutions or initiatives that you've seen or been part of that are successfully supporting African youths and women in entrepreneurship?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's actually a few. I will probably start off with this now very popular one, Andela. And I mean, it's quite big now. It has killed for a while, but when Andela started, the whole idea was to be able to provide opportunities for young people in the gig economy. Now, Andela has trained thousands of young people, and you see these models coming up a lot. There is also a good friend of mine based in Accra at the moment. This company is called Code Train. Also started a few years ago, and their goal has been and is still training young people with industry-specific technology skills, especially when it comes to software. And so you see how they have trained over thousands of young people, not just from Ghana but across sub-Saharan Africa, placed them with companies like Google, companies outside Africa and within Africa as well, with some banks within Africa, and you see the model coming up all the time, and then you tend to think about why is this happening. It's happening because there's a clear demand for these skills, right? Even within the African continent, right? And so unlocking these skills has become increasingly important for innovators that are also in the markets trying to solve problems. So HR building skills have been a key part of supporting young people who now need the skills needed to code, to develop different solutions. And I guess this is just one sector of it. There's also, and I'm speaking to you from Hamburg, Germany. And one of the things that is becoming increasingly clear in Europe is there is a huge shortage of jobs. And there's an irony. Africa has a huge shortage of employment, and then there's a huge shortage of jobs here, right? Not jobs, actually, job seekers. That's what I mean. So there's a huge shortage of job seekers in Europe, right? And what especially Germany, what Germany is doing is now looking outside Europe to see how they can bring people in to actually fit markets like the health sector, in the building sector, in all those different sectors. Whereas on the other hand, when you go into Africa, you've got people in carpentry, for example, which is a very strong market, but has never still been clearly, how do you call it, clearly professionalized in a sense, right? It's not standardized. Everybody can do anything and everything at the same time. But you see opportunities coming up for the standardization of these markets. And then I know one startup that's actually looking into bringing together on one platform artisans, and basically trying to standardize them a little bit and then moving them into a platform where they are vetted, then people can actually get access to them as well, right? And it's really important for you to understand the way innovation and innovators, especially young innovators, are rethinking what has already been existing, systems that have been existing, and changing them into now very bankable ideas that are actually having an effect and an impact across Africa and also the continents that they are in. Personally, so this was before I started Kutana Technologies. My first management consulting company now run a program we call the African Climate Innovation Challenge. And the goal of the African Climate Innovation Challenge is to identify young innovators that are probably in school or not in school. And this is where I really talk about the access, right? The access is not, I totally respect what Prof is saying, but I will beg to differ and say we don't have to get everything right. We just need to provide as much access as possible and different pathways as possible, so that if I decide I don't want to go to school, and I don't want to become a professor, I don't want to become a doctor and a PhD holder and all that, but I do want to go to a path of carpentry and become the best at it, I could still be a millionaire by doing that, right? And so it's important, and it's just about not about being a millionaire, but the point I'm trying to make is the avenues need to be created to be able to create the opportunities that exist, because at the moment the opportunities that exist across the African continent are capped. No matter what you do, no matter how much increase we have in the people, by 2050, a quarter of the world population is going to be coming from Africa, but the opportunities are literally capped. The only way you increase the opportunities is also enabling small businesses or innovators create and scale their innovation and solutions by building bridges across the different countries to allow them grow so that they can bring on board, all these new entrants into the job market. I will end by saying this, right? I saw a statistics that said, so in 2022, 633 startups, so innovation focused, these are software focused businesses, were funded across Africa, and these that are provided up to 30,000 jobs. This is 633 startups. In Nigeria alone, there is over 4 million SMEs. So you need to start to understand how much volume we're talking about if even just one startup is able to scale what they're doing.
Curriculum. Along the line, you talked about the knowledge economy that we have in the world today. And I wanted to speak specifically to young people who are misusing the availability of this, should I say, the internet. You talk to, I think the local phrase we use is Yahoo Yahoo boys. How can we reintegrate them in a way that will be more productive for the continent than this bad image that it continues to bring?
Yeah, thank you so much for that interesting question. A lot needs to happen. One of the books that I wrote when I was graduating from the University of Lagos, so one of the books that I've written generally, it's about the youth, and it's entitled The Youth Liabilities and Responsibilities. The issue of Yahoo Yahoo is a reflection of the broader crisis, moral decadence we are experiencing in different parts of Africa, especially in countries like Nigeria. There is this culture of, get rich quickly without doing anything. They see that manifest in our leaders, our political leaders. Whenever somebody is elected into offices, into an office, suddenly they become rich. And people know the source of that wealth is stealing from public treasury. They're embraced in different places, in religious houses, they are invited, they donate a lot of money from questionable sources. We barely raise issue about this. And what we are trying to do with this is that we are telling the youth that we are okay. What matters is that just make the money. Once you make the money, we are going to embrace you. The way we have embraced our leaders who are known to be stealing from public treasury for the most part. There are good ones among them. However, we now look into that. The way our youth have internalized that is that they can do anything to become rich. And part of that is Yahoo Yahoo. How do we now solve this problem? Well, a lot needs to be done to solve this problem and redirect this energy. One of the things that needs to do is that we need to go back to our hopes. Parents, they need to do their job. They need to be committed and intentional about raising morally upright children. That is part of the missing link. Everybody is so aware about, I want to be successful. And as a result of that, we are all working aggressively, abandoning our parental responsibility, doing the necessary oversight, making sure that we are not leaving our children to the society and to social media platforms to raise for us. We need to do our jobs as parents. The second thing, neighborhood environment matters. When I was growing up in Nigeria, I used to tell folks, it was those that we call the elderly ones in the neighborhood. We call them, in Yoruba parlance, the Bodadubos. That's trained us. And what were they doing? Organizing free classes for us. I could recall when I was in SS2, I started using the textbook used to teach mathematics in the university at the other level. Why? I had those Bodadubos. We had them all over the place, gifting us, preparing us for the future ahead of us. The Bodadubos we have now, what are they doing? They are part of those that are inviting the kids into courtesan, into Yahoo Yahoo and all of those things. So we need to make intentional efforts to revive what is happening in our neighborhoods. Our neighborhoods, our communities need to be retooled to align with the future that we intend for our youths.
Yeah.
Currently, what the neighborhood setup aligns with is to be breeding criminals. Yahoo boys are criminals. There are no two ways to look at it. These are criminals that are being given fanciful names. And when you look at what is happening in the neighborhood, that needs to be addressed. Now we need to come back to the educational system. We need to have teachers that can actually project values into our educational system. Because we are not just providing education for people. Education can produce criminals. Education without moral, education without ethics can produce criminals.
Prof, you really are a strong advocate. You're really a strong advocate of the bottom-up approach. It starts, everybody's involved. When we talk about what role the young people can take in improving our economy and enhancing our growth, it's a holistic approach. As we wrap up, Samuel, your final message, based on everything we've talked about so far, what are the key things you would like our audience to take away from this conversation today?
Thank you, Felicity. So, generally, what I would say is, I guess for me, I come from an entrepreneurship point of view. The goal of, I guess, my message is not to say everybody should be an entrepreneur. And Prof, to your point on parents, making sure that their children are doing well. I'm actually with my daughter right now whilst I do this, so I really can relate to those points. I think generally for anyone that is looking into entering into the job market, you need to understand that things have changed and things are changing pretty fast. There are essential skills that you need to have to be able to outcompete your counterparts both within Africa, but also you're not just competing with job seekers within Africa anymore. And so it's very clear that you need to do your own research and a bit more of your own initiative, taking initiative to train, educate yourself, build yourself up so that you can be a lot more competitive on the job market. Africa for sure is going to be the biggest, largest sort of pool of job seekers in 2030. But it doesn't mean that just because you're in the pool, the jobs are going to be existing, right? You need to be fitting for the jobs. But there's also other channels. There are channels of becoming an entrepreneur. This is a very, very hard path to go. I mean, 90% of entrepreneurs or startups that are launched fail. So you need to understand that it's not just a matter of once you start a business, everybody will come together. I already mentioned that access to capital is something that is still very, very low compared to other markets.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today's conversation.
Cool.
I'm sorry, that's all the time we have for today's conversation. Gentlemen, absolute pleasure. It's been speaking with you today. I'm hoping that our audience got a thing or two from our conversation today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you too.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
All right, for me, some key points I'd like to just highlight quickly. The Prof talked about the bottom-up approach, fixing our dysfunctional education system. Access, Samuel talked about access, different access to education. It doesn't have to be, maybe a university degree and stuff like that. He also talked about the role of the society. We want a good economy, growth for Africa from the youth. Then everybody has to be involved. One final thing was access to capital. I was quite curious when Samuel talked about the fact that most of the funding startups have comes from external bodies. We really need to review how this funding gets to entrepreneurs and how we can get our own pool here in Africa in a way that helps with the goal of growth and productivity. That is our show for today. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you next time. For now, it's bye from me.